Greetings fellow gorehounds and welcome back to another blood splattered vlog. So this week we once again have another 2016 catch-up movie, but unlike some of these 2016 catch-up movies, I knew next to nothing about this movie going into it. I mean, I knew that it starred Natasha Lyonne, and I knew that it starred Chloë Sevigny, and I knew that it was about an unwanted pregnancy, but outside of that, I knew nothing. I hadn't heard good things, I hadn't heard bad things, I hadn't heard shit. But one day I saw that it hit Netflix streaming, and I figured, what the fuck, let's watch this movie, let's check it out, and maybe I can get a vlog out of it. And the movie I'm of course talking about is Antibirth, the new movie by a guy named Danny Perez. Now before watching this movie, I had no idea who Danny Perez is, I am not familiar at all with his work, but based on this movie, I would say he's a cross between like Rob Zombie Light and Frank Henenlotter. Which is a weird as fuck description, but trust me, it will make sense when you see this movie. And I guess the first thing I should say is that I liked this movie. I didn't love it, but I definitely liked it. It is a solid horror movie, but it's definitely one that not everyone is gonna enjoy as much as I did. There's a lot about it that rubbed me the right way that I almost guarantee is gonna rub a whole lot of people the wrong way. Because at its core, much like Rob Zombie movies, this is very much a white trash horror film. I mean, the movie centers around poor druggies living in the shitty parts of Michigan. You really can't get more white trash than that. But honestly, I actually kind of like the white trash aesthetic because it actually separated this movie from similar movies with similar premises. Because for those of you who don't know, this is yet another movie about a unwanted pregnancy that ultimately leads to some sort of weird fucked up conclusion. So basically, this is once again Rosemary's Baby or The Devil's Due or any movie that shares that similar type of premise. And unlike a lot of those movies which centers around either rich or middle class people and this weird like devil pregnancy, this movie centers around white trash people, and I kind of dug that. It gave it its own unique thing. Now granted, later on in the movie, in the second half of the movie, there's parts of it that really separates it from those movies, but I'll get to that when we get to the spoilers. For now, let me just talk about some of the things I liked that weren't spoilery. Like, I really fucking love the body horror in this movie. Most of it's done with really solid practical effects. It's really cringy and kind of gross, and I really dig that. And I really dug the two leads. Natasha Lyonne and Chloë Sevigny are really awesome in this movie and are really outside the norm of the usual, like, female roles in these kind of movies. Like, normally the kind of character who would get this kind of, like, unwanted, like, evil pregnancy would be, like, a middle-class goody-two-shoes girl. But in this movie, Natasha Lyonne plays this complete drug-addled mess of a woman who is a complete asshole, super sarcastic, and just really entertaining. That being said, I have a feeling that some of you out there will find her way more annoying than I found her entertaining, so I should probably warn you about that, because she can get obnoxious. In fact, the dialogue in general could get a little too wordy and a little too obnoxious. It felt a little too much like it was trying to be like a Tarantino film at times. Not super hardcore Tarantino, but it was very obvious that whoever was writing this movie was kind of in love with the sound of his own voice. Which in my opinion worked for characters like Natasha Lyonne's and Chloë Sevigny's, but for other characters felt a little flat. Another thing I really like about this movie is I really like the way it's edited. It's actually kind of got this like psychedelic touch that kind of mirrors the way that the main character sleepwalks through the world in this drug-addled daze. And this is complemented by scenes where she's getting like actually drugged out and we actually get some like super flashy almost music video editing. But unlike a lot of movies that use that kind of editing, it's actually very warranted here and it's not hard to follow. You can still see exactly what's happening. It's just got, like I said, this slight psychedelic tinge. I also really like the soundtrack to this movie, not only the music it uses, but also the score itself. All the songs in this movie have this nice like new wave tinge to it, while the score has this great like garage rock kind of ambient noise sound to it. And this aspect of the movie actually makes this movie stand out a little more from other movies that I saw from last year. Because at the end of the day, the way this movie sounds is unique to itself. I'm not going to mistake it for any other movie. On the downside, I do think the movie gets a little too wordy for its own good, and as a result moves a lot slower than it could. And I also felt that while a lot of the humor was hitting me right, it might bug a lot of people the same way Rob Zombie movies bug a lot of people. Like there's a whole lot of excess swearing, which doesn't bother me, but like I said, some people don't like it. And while most of the movie is done with some really great practical effects, there is some really shitty digital like touch-ups to it that I feel like kind of ruin some of the effects. There's one point at the end of the movie where they're doing this really great body horror sequence that was really awesome up until like the smoke effects just kind of obscured some of the greatness of it. And I really don't feel like the smoke effects were necessary necessary, and if they were necessary, why not get a smoke machine or something? I don't know, I just didn't understand why they decided to digitally add smoke. You'll know what I'm talking about when you see it, because it's really noticeable. Anyway, my fellow gorehounds, I do not know what more to say before I get to the spoilers, so let me just say, I like this movie, I recommend it, it's currently on Netflix, but I am going to warn you once again, this movie's not going to be for everybody, so if you don't like the movie, it's okay. And with that all said, let us move on to the spoilers. Alright, so this movie opens up with Natasha Lyonne's character and Chloë Sevigny's character at this, like, underground party where everyone's getting really fucking wasted and it's all in slow motion, with this kind of new wave / rock music blasting, and I really fucking loved the sound of that. I totally rock out to that. And Natasha Lyonne's character is slowly dragged away by this one guy who's obviously this creepy looking fucking, like, drug-addled dude. And her friend just kind of watches as she's dragged off, and you're wondering why she's just watching and not stopping her, because it's obvious that this is not good. And I'm sitting there going like, is she about to get raped? Is this movie gonna open up with rape? It would make sense with the premise. Oh my god, a movie about unwanted pregnancy might open up with rape. Stop the presses. I am offended. But it turns out she doesn't get raped, and she just wakes up the next morning feeling like complete shit and goes to her friend who's a veterinarian and tries to get a diagnosis. But her friend, being a veterinarian, is like, well, I can't diagnose shit and I can't prescribe shit, so I don't know what's wrong with you, but I think you're pregnant. And then the next few scenes after this just fully establish just how trashy Chloë Sevigny and Natasha Lyonne are. It shows them going to a convenience store, and Natasha Lyonne is just picking food off the shelf and just eating it, like, in front of the cashier without paying for it. They're arguing over whether or not she should go to the doctor, but she doesn't trust doctors because she thinks doctors are just there to prescribe drugs and she could already get drugs. And she's even refusing to go to a free clinic because, hey, she's clearly not pregnant. How could she be? She hasn't had sex. Which, to that end, fair enough. If you haven't had sex, like, why would you think you were pregnant? But then again, she can't even remember the night before, so you'd think that, hey, maybe sex was a possibility if you can't remember some of these nights. I mean, obviously the night before would be a little too early to start feeling morning sickness, but still, like, it's obviously not the first time she hasn't remembered the night before. But anyway, they go back to her place, they toke up, she starts rubbing her belly against the TV, and then the TV explodes for some reason, as if there is something in her belly that is electromagnetically interfering with the television set itself. In a really shitty CGI explosion with really shitty smoke effects, which is not the smoke effects I was talking about earlier, but is still pretty bad. And then we see her go to work, and she's apparently a maid at this, like, really cheap hotel. And she and her coworker totally snort some coke while they're getting ready for their job. Like, yeah, that's how white trashy this movie is. So then for the next few scenes of the movie, it's basically her going about her normal life and just slowly but surely seeming to be more and more pregnant, with really weird and fucked up shit happening with her body. Like, at one point she starts peeling skin off of her neck, and it, like, literally just starts, like, stretching out like this fucking long, and it's super gross, and it's really practical, and it's really good. She gets, like, these boils on her feet that she stabs with a knife and ends up like just having all this pus and blood oozing out of them. She tries to not think about it and going on these drinking benders, and she starts losing track of time and space. And at one point she ends up throwing up on the job and ends up getting woken up by this one girl who's the tenant of the room she was cleaning. And she ends up befriending this tenant who turns out to be like a former military officer who was kicked from the job when she seemingly was abducted by aliens and then started asking questions about it later. And by this point in the movie, Natasha Lyonne has, like, gotten this huge bulge, and it's only been a fucking week. And when she lifts up her shirt onto the bulge, like, things are, like, moving inside of it. It's a really bad CG effect, but still, like, the idea was gotten across. Though I totally wish they had done that effect practically. It would have looked way better, in my opinion. And while this is all going on, we find out that Chloë Sevigny's boyfriend is this drug dealer and former Marine, and that he's made this deal with some sort of shadowy figure in order to create, like, these really cheap drugs. But he doesn't trust this figure, and he doesn't know if the drugs themselves are going to be effective. So it turns out the first person he tested the drug is Natasha Lyonne and one of his friends. And while Natasha Lyonne is going through this weird pregnancy thing as a result of this drug test, his friend ends up inside and out. Like, his skin completely, like, fucking goes inside and out, and he's dead. And so the drug dealer guy is like, oh shit, what the fuck is going on? I don't know what's happening. And Chloë Sevigny is worried because now her friend's in trouble. But Chloë Sevigny still goes along with her drug boyfriend and the shadowy figure because she wants to get in contact with her kid that she gave up for adoption years before. And she has no connections to get into contact with him, but the shadowy figure can find him. So despite her love of Natasha Lyonne, her desire to see her child is stronger. So you got this great scenario where you got all these characters who are emotionally entangled with one another, but are backstabbing one another and have all these mixed loyalties. And all this time, you're just trying to figure out, like, what the fuck is going on? Is this aliens? Is this some sort of government experiment? And naturally, as this movie reaches its climax and Natasha Lyonne and the military girl end up confronting the drug dealer guy, we do get our answers. And she does end up giving birth to some sort of fucked up, really awesomely practical creature with some shitty CGI smoke around it, but whatever. But as to what the creature is and as to what the answers are for what's going on, I'm gonna leave that to you to find out for yourself. So yeah, Antibirth may not be a perfect movie, but it is definitely a movie that's got me super excited for future Danny Perez films. I have no idea what else he has planned for the future, but he's definitely now on my radar officially. And that's pretty shocking to me because at this point, Rosemary's Baby is pretty well played out. So it was extremely refreshing to see a movie take that basic premise and go in 100% a completely unique direction with it. But at this point, I think I'm repeating myself, so as per usual, my fellow gorehounds, like, comment, subscribe, be sure to ring that little notification bell, and peace out, my fellow gorehounds, and I'll catch y'all later.